Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tracking down a massive, hidden leak in your monthly budget. And no, I'm not talking about your daily latte habit or those 5 streaming subscriptions you totally forgot to cancel. I'm talking about something much more insidious, much more powerful, and quite frankly, much closer to home. We are looking at exactly why your friends, your family, and your broader social circle might just be the absolute greatest hidden expense draining your finances month after month. It is a fascinating journey into the psychology of spending, and I am absolutely thrilled to break it down for you today. Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to take a second and think about your last few big purchases, or even just your routine weekend spending. Where is your money actually going? When you tap your card or hand over that cash, who is really making that decision? See, we all like to think we're in the driver's seat, right? Carefully evaluating our needs and checking our bank balances. But the reality? A staggering amount of our spending is driven not by our own rational needs, but by completely unseen social forces. To understand why this happens, we really have to look at the psychology behind your wallet. As this brilliantly insightful book, The Psychology of Money, points out, investing and spending are actually very rarely about math. The finance industry desperately wants you to believe it's all about spreadsheets, formulas, and calculated returns. But the truth? It's deeply ingrained in human behavior and emotions. We aren't calculators, we're social creatures, and our money naturally moves exactly where our emotions and social instincts guide it. Section 1. The Myth of Rational Money and Why Traditional Finance Has It Wrong. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between how traditional finance expects us to act and the irrational reality of behavioral finance. On the one hand, traditional finance gives us modern portfolio theory and efficient markets. It basically assumes you and I possess perfect rationality, meaning we evaluate every single purchase logically to maximize our resources. But on the other hand, behavioral finance acknowledges the messy, everyday reality of being human. It recognizes that we're completely riddled with cognitive biases, our self-control is incredibly limited, and honestly, we make highly irrational decisions all the time. And because we aren't perfectly rational, we constantly fall victim to what behavioral economists call systematic errors. These are irrational decision-making patterns that we repeat over and over and over again. And here's the kicker. These systematic errors aren't just quirky personality traits. They fundamentally affect prices, they create massive market inefficiencies, and, most importantly for us today, they are the exact mechanisms that cause us to drain our own personal budgets without even realizing we're doing it. Section 2. The True Cost of Friendship and the Undeniable Power of the Liking Rule. This is where we see exactly how our closest relationships actively trigger these systematic errors. The renowned psychologist Robert Cialdini coined this the liking rule. It basically proves that we are highly, almost helplessly vulnerable to requests from people we know and like. To see that in action, just look at this staggering number, $2.5 million. What does this represent? That is the estimated daily sales figure for Tupperware. Yes, Tupperware. And how do they achieve this colossal level of daily commerce? Not through traditional retail stores. They achieve this simply by turning friends into salespeople. They literally weaponize the liking rule. Just consider this confession from a consumer who was interviewed about attending these home parties. She said, "I've got all the containers I need, but when a friend calls up, I feel like I have to go. What can I do? It's for one of my friends." I mean, that perfectly captures the trap, doesn't it? We happily spend money on things we absolutely do not need just to avoid the agonizing social discomfort of offending a friend. The financial transaction becomes completely secondary to the social transaction. And this brilliantly illustrates how corporations have scaled this exact psychological vulnerability. Let's look at the famous MCI calling circle strategy from a few decades ago. A sales rep would call a target and explain that a friend of theirs had put them on a list. If the target simply switched their phone provider to MCI, their friend would save 20% on their calls. People weren't switching because MCI had a better product or a cheaper rate for them. They switched just to avoid the perceived insult of being a bad friend. When surveyed about this tactic, an MCI salesperson admitted this strategy worked 9 out of 10 times. 9 out of 10. That is the astonishing financial power of peer pressure. Section 3. Social Proof and Financial Bubbles. The Dangerous Illusion of the Herd. You see, it's not just our close friends who dictate our spending, it's the larger crowd around us too. When you look at the history of modern market bubbles, the timeline is frankly terrifying. In 1987, you have the Black Monday plunge of over 20%. In 1990, the Japanese Nikkei index drops to nearly half its peak after an astronomical, totally illogical rise. In 2000, the dot-com tech bubble bursts, wiping out companies that had billions in valuation but literally zero actual revenue. These events weren't driven by rational changes in asset valuation. They were driven by the herd. Following the crowd doesn't just make you buy an expensive sweater you don't need, it drives massive, irrational market bubbles and devastating financial crashes. Cialdini describes this exact phenomenon with the phrase, click, whir. It's like playing an old-school tape recorder. Click, a trigger happens in our environment, and whir, our automatic, unthinking behavior patterns just start playing on a loop. A rapidly rising stock price, or the frantic actions of a crowd, acts as a trigger feature that literally shuts off the rational, calculating part of our brain. We stop thinking, and we just start copying. A perfect micro-example of this is what happens at the horse track. Imagine this step by step. First, a high roller deliberately places a massive early bet on a terrible horse, a real long shot. Because of the sheer size of the bet, the odds on the board instantly shift. Second, the casual, uncertain bettors look up at the board. They don't really know horses, so they rely on social proof. They see this brand new favorite and just assume someone knows something they don't, so they blindly follow suit. Third, a massive snowballing effect takes over as the entire crowd pours their money into a fundamentally bad bet. Social proof is at its absolutely most dangerous when we feel unsure. Instead of doing our own research, we just copy the person next to us. Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 4, peer pressure and buying habits, the invisible scripts guiding your wallet. So, how do these isolated incidents cement themselves into permanent behaviors? Well, sociologists have identified a fascinating three-part movement to how social habits form and spread. First, a habit starts with the strong ties of friendship. Say, you start buying a specific expensive brand of coffee because your absolute best friend swears by it. Second, it grows through the weak ties of your broader community. Suddenly, everyone in your neighborhood or your office is doing it, and that subtle peer pressure kicks in. Finally, the habit truly endures because it creates a fresh sense of identity. You aren't just buying that coffee anymore. You are a gourmet coffee person. The spending habit is now fully baked into who you are. As research into atomic habits reveals, social norms create invisible scripts for behavior. We are more likely to stick with habits that are socially rewarded. This means your environment and your communities actually dictate your routine buying habits far more than your own internal willpower does. If your social group values expensive dinners out, you are going to find yourself routinely paying for expensive dinners simply to maintain your inclusion and acceptance within that group. Section 5. Nudging your way to savings, using choice architecture to protect your money. So, how do we actually fight back against all this? We need to pivot to the solution. If our environment influences us so powerfully, we have to learn how to design that environment to our advantage. And that brings us to a brilliant concept called choice architecture. This is the practice of carefully designing the social environment to influence people's choices while fully preserving their freedom to choose. It's the concept of nudging. You are deliberately arranging the information in the environment around you to protect your wallet from that automatic, unthinking click-whir spending we talked about earlier. So the crucial point is understanding the difference between forcing a change and nudging a change. Coercion relies on mandates, forced restrictions, and outright bans on your spending. It's psychologically costly, and it usually fails because, let's face it, people hate losing their freedom. Nudges, however, rely on low-cost transparency, setting up automatic default rules, like automatically enrolling in a retirement savings plan, and just simplifying information. Nudges gently guide you to better financial decisions without ever removing your free will. And the power of a good nudge is totally unbelievable. Behavioral science studies reveal that simply informing people on their utility bill about how their personal electricity use compares to their neighbors increases energy conservation just as much as hitting them with a massive spike in the price of electricity. Literally, just knowing what the community norm is acts as a massive incentive. Positive social norms can actually be a far stronger motivator than actual economic rewards or penalties. Which brings us to our final thought. The next time you sit down to review your monthly budget, I want you to pull up your last credit card statement. Go down the list, look at every single transaction, and ask yourself one simple, provocative question. Did I buy this for me or for them? Take a hard look. Identify the hidden costs of your social circle, recognize those invisible scripts, and take back control of your financial architecture. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the choices around you.